Walking through the ruined city, surrounded by monsters at every turn, one man grumbled under his breath, "I'm so sick of them." Suddenly, a noise nearby caught his attention. He stopped in his tracks, his body tensing as he turned his head sharply, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. After walking a few more meters toward the source of the sound, he finally spotted the culprit. A rather interesting sight unfolded before him, prompting a grudging grin to creep across his face. With a mix of annoyance and amusement, he muttered, "Why does this fool always make everything so difficult by running so far away?" The next moment, right in front of him, he saw three monsters surrounding one man, knocking him to the ground. Realizing that this was the man he was looking for, the guy said, disappointedly, "Oh, I finally found him, but he ordered me to live a long time." As he continued to watch the monsters tear apart the dead man, he added, "What a sight." The next moment, all the monsters who were busy eating suddenly turned their heads to him, and he received a notification, 222, and 221 have spotted you. With a disappointed sigh that he would have to fight monsters again because of someone's incompetence, the guy said, "I wonder if it's possible to disable this stupid function of naming each monster." At the same time, the monsters let out a piercing howl that seemed to be intended to intimidate the stranger who had invaded their territory. Having carried out a psychological attack, all three monsters rushed to their victim, who came to them on his own. Noticing that he would now have to confront the monster, the guy put his dagger aside and then activated the skills, received system notifications, "You activated the addition, you activated the multiplication." After the battle, the guy headed back to his place of residence. As soon as he arrived at the checkpoint, he knocked on the gate and shouted, "Hey, do you hear me? Open up." As soon as there was a knock on the gate, it immediately opened and a guy named Jiam Junjin, who was a high-difficulty player, appeared inside and happily said, "Hyung, you're back at last." When he met the guard, the guy said, "I don't have enough nerve cells left. Can you send someone else?" And Jiam Junjin replied, "Well, Hen, you know that no one else can do it but you, and what happened to that idiot who ran away?" In response to his question, the guard heard that he was dead, eaten by scavengers, to which he exclaimed in shock that he had played so quickly, but he had played on a high difficulty level. Hearing the surprise in his friend's words, the guy just shrugged and said indifferently, "When I came in, I saw 3 A-rank monsters enjoying a meal." After receiving a sudden report on the situation from outside, Jiam Junjin nervously said that and then mentally added that there were A-rank monsters there. Imagining those powerful monsters in his head, he added in his head that players at a high difficulty level are strong, but even one A-rank monster is no match for such a monster in strength. "But there are now 3 of them in the vicinity of us, and we need to deal with this urgently," the guy asked anxiously. "Where did you see them? Report back." In response, he said, "Don't worry. I've already killed them," and then confidently said, "Okay, then." Having reported that the strong monsters had been eliminated by him, the guy said, "I'm hungry. Let's go to the dining room." And he heard the guard say, "Hey, Hen, do you hear me? Just tell me honestly." Turning his gaze to Kong Tassen, a player with a low difficulty level, Jiam Junjin asked, "You don't play on a low difficulty level, do you?" "I'm right." In response to Kong Tassen's question, he waved his hand and said, "This is nonsense. There were a bunch of other players with me, and we made our way through the maze together, if you want to ask them." After hearing the recommendation of his friend Jiam Junjin, he followed his trail and asked him if all the Ijas except you were killed, and the survivors sometimes appear but die of wounds a few days later, to which he replied, "Are you serious?" Then the boy looked around at the ruined city and said again, "I can't understand how a light player can survive here, even for an average player. So your calmness is rather suspicious, Hen. Hey, do you hear me, Hen? Why are you so strong? For example, I'm at a difficult level, but I still can't compare with you." Then in response to his question, he heard that it was because you are lazy asses, and that's the whole reason. He added happily, "Oh, you're at it again." Arriving at the dining room, the boys took their seats at the table where they were served and Kong Tassen said, "You couldn't find anything better. Could you at least grow yams or corn?" In response to his friend's words, Jiam Junjin took a bite of the vegetable and said, "Well, what can you do? Potatoes are cheap, easier to grow, and we have restrictions on distribution. By the way, Hen, you still haven't learned the skill of fast cultivation. to which he replied that he had forgotten, I'm a light player. How did I get such a skill, especially since wherever we go there is food, to which he replied, indeed. The next moment someone shouted somewhere on the street, don't joke, it's not true, to which he was answered, calm down, please. Hearing the screams, Kong Tassen said that it looked like someone had returned from a sweep and Jiam Junjin answered him as if it were so. Then the guy added, picking up his potato, I think you'll be arrested and reprimanded for disorderly conduct, to which his friend replied, it turns out he's a hardcore player. Looks like you'll have to intervene, hen. The next moment Tassen came from the street, and hearing his name, the boy clutched his potato in his hand in anger. At the same time an angry newcomer exclaimed, don't lie to me, this can't be the planet Earth. After the last raid everything should have been over. Continuing to make noise and disorder in the camp, the guy shouted that it was a joke, don't try to put this nonsense in my head. At the same time, looking out of the dining room tent, Kong Tassen asked where Li Taiyong was now, and he was told that he was currently on reconnaissance. Trying to somehow resolve the situation, an elderly man approached the noisy boy and said, young friend, this is really the planet Earth. While you were in the maze the world changed a lot. Calm down and listen to what I have to say. Before the man could finish speaking, the angry guy punched him in the jaw and shouted, stop lying to me. Seeing what had just happened, Kong Tassen said in frustration, and then heard from Jiam Junjayun, well, good luck then, friend. And then he added, if you eat my potatoes before I come back I'll multiply you by 0, he said. After ensuring his food, he got out of the car and said to the furious newcomer, unfortunately it's all true and humanity is facing extinction, to which he said, stop lying. And then he asked you in surprise what was jammed in there. Seeing the newcomer a question, Kong heard an angry exclamation in response, this can't be our planet. Do you know how many players there are in this game? Do you think they could stop a bunch of monsters? It's all a lie. And then he thought, most players who return to the planet Earth after completing the maze's clearing begin to slowly go crazy because they are unable to accept the new reality. This happens quite often, but it is impossible to get used to it, and in this case there is only one way to prevent it. Looking at the angry guy who was making a ruckus in the camp, Tassen said in a stern tone, I'll have to hit you on the cauldron so you finally realize that your name is not being played with here. Noticing a system notification with a challenge to a duel, the guy said to Li Zhongchuan, are you really offering me a duel? And who are you anyway? After learning the name of the guy who had challenged him to the duel, Li Zhongchuan opened the general chat and said haughtily to Kong Tassen, you're the light one who constantly sends all kinds of nonsense in the general chat. He spread his hands in front of him and mockingly said, it's ridiculous. You're challenging a hard player. Don't you know that the difference between us is just as huge as heaven and earth? In response to his loud speeches, the arrogant boy said, shut your mouth and fight. If you can beat me, I will show you the real reality you are looking for. The words that came from Kong Tassen's mouth hurt Li Zhongchuan quite badly, after which he angrily exclaimed, drawing his weapon, watch out. If I suddenly finish you off, it won't be my problem. Pulling his sword back to prepare for the attack, he activated the augmentation skill, increasing the attack power by half as well as the concentration that made his strikes more accurate, and the harder hit that gave the next attack increased damage potential. Seeing his opponent's skills, Kong Tassen was surprised to hear his own head say that he had increased his own power and hit quite hard. The next moment, Li Zhongchuan attacked the guy to instantly finish him off and end this senseless fight with an obvious outcome. As soon as his sword touched the enemy, the guy saw a system notification that the user Kong Tassen had activated the skill of zeroing the first strike. The damage inflicted on Kong Tassen was 0 points. Seeing this, Li Zhongchuan exclaimed in confusion that this was possible. At the same time holding his opponent's blade, Kong asked, so how are you doing? Hearing the question from his opponent, the guy thought in confusion, but why didn't my shot work? What kind of ability is this? I've never heard of it before. Having not received a message from the angry guy, Kong, preparing to attack, exclaimed, well, now it's my turn. Having been hit by Li Zhongchuan, activating the skill of resistance, which was supposed to reduce the damage received by half, he thought painfully and then saw the notification of Kong Tassen's skill. The last judgment bypasses any defensive skills of the opponent. The damage to Li Zhongchuan was 49 points, and when he saw this he exclaimed in confusion. When he came to after the shock of what happened, the guy swung his sword and thought only 40, so he could not overcome the huge difference in statistics between a light and a hard player. As soon as he finished his thoughts he noticed that his opponent activated his skill again and then asked you 10,000 health points, I'm right. As he swung his fist to repeat the attack, Kong Tassin saw a notification added amplification your damage doubled, added to multiplication, your damage quadrupled activated skill last judgment bypasses any defensive skills. Seeing that this time it might not be the same as last time, the boy screamed out in fright, to which Tassin replied, what happened? Come on. Take it. Immediately afterwards the blow struck the enemy's head, pressing it into the ground with such destructive power that even the crust of the earth was destroyed. After inflicting 9,604 points of damage on Li Zhongchuan with his attack, Kong Tassin asked, so what do you understand now? Looking at his defeated opponent, the boy added that this place was indeed the earth. Seeing once again the words about the truthfulness of his movement on his native planet, Li Zhongchuan groaned heavily and exclaimed, stop joking with me. Shedding tears after having to come to terms with the harsh reality, he added sadly, why did this world suddenly become like this? If I had known, I would never have gone to clear the maze. Once upon a time peace and tranquility did reign on planet Earth, but it was only until a certain turning point in humanity. This very moment came quite unexpectedly, when one day the heavens parted and giant hordes of monsters fell to the earth, and so when the monsters began to destroy everything in their path, every inhabitant of the planet had to make their own choice. Each person was presented with a window in which they could choose the level of difficulty, which included easy mode, normal mode, hard mode, alone mode. After a person made his or her choice, he or she immediately moved to a mysterious place called a labyrinth, and they were able to return to Earth only when it was completely cleared. However, that was not the worst of it. The biggest horror awaited them on their return after clearing the maze, when they arrived home to find their home planet in a state of ruin, teeming with monsters. After the battle was over and the newcomer, who did not want to accept reality, had calmed down, Kong Tassin said, rubbing his hands together, that we still had to try to save the world together. Hearing the joyful exclamations of his friend, who was approaching him and shouting, hey, you're a good guy. He asked him unhappily what was going on, and he replied, of course I have to see my hen in action, and then added, you talk too much. While Li Jiangchun was being dragged to the hospital, Jim Junjin happily said, you did really well. This news always hits players very hard, even those who chose the hard difficulty level. After catching the potato thrown to him by his friend Kong Tassin, he asked in surprise what was so special about me teaching such a weakling, and was told that he was not a weakling, but you were too strong. Having bitten off a piece of the vegetable he was leaving for storage, the guy said disappointedly, well, the potatoes are cold, and that's why I didn't want to interfere, to which his friend replied, hen, tell me honestly where you got the skill of multiplication. I'm also interested in where you got the skill of the last judgment, against which no defense can stand, where you got the nullification of the first strike. What kind of cheating skills are these? In general I have only seen them from you. How did you manage to get them at all? He replied, with a lot of hard work and effort. Having received a banal answer from his friend Gai Yum Junjin, he said, offended, you always say that, is there really another new player today? What a rush, to which Kong replied, I don't think so. The next moment the people gathered around the leader, who had returned from a business trip, joyfully shouted Li Taeyong had returned. After a while, when Kong Tae-san arrived at her office with the girl, he said, humanity will soon be destroyed, and you are so worried about interior decorations. Looking at the vases and other decorations in the girl's office, the guy added, I've always been sick of your love for all kinds of luxury. Putting his hand to the frame of the painting, he added, there are monsters roaming the streets everywhere, and she even managed to deliver such a huge painting without a single scratch. Walking along the painting of the Last Supper, which was quite impressive in size, he added that she was the only one who was able to clear the maze so quickly. The next moment, turning his gaze to the leader, Kong Tae-san added, and why the strongest among us was a girl, you can answer my question. In response to her friend's words, the girl looked at him with an interested look and said, in such difficult times, it is quite useful to have something to be interested in. Maybe you will find a hobby for yourself. Hearing the girl's proposal, The guy folded his arms in front of him and replied, "Let's talk about it when I have at least some free time." Then Lee Taeyong asked, "So you taught that new guy a lesson?" Reviewing her characteristics and smiling happily, the girl added, "A player at a low difficulty level teaches a player at a high difficulty level, where else you can see something like this." Having put her characteristics on display, the girl heard the boy's displeased voice, "Have you decided to brag or what?" In response to Kang Tae-san's question, he said no. "I just checked your show," and then added, "You're just showing off for a pathetic light player." When the boy put his characteristics on public display, the girl, evaluating them, said in surprise, "I knew it. You're really pathetic," and was answered with an offended tone, "You're picking a fight." Extending her hand to Kang Tae-san, Lee Taeyong said, "I told you that this is just a test for a light player. Your performance is quite good." So the design of the mysterious maze, which everyone who chose the difficulty level got into, is divided into 4 levels of difficulty. When the player finished the maze, his growth stopped, and it was simply impossible to continue, no matter how hard he tried to become stronger, which is why the difference between the difficulty levels and the characteristics was simply enormous. And most of the hard players had thousands of times better characteristics than Kang Tae-san. However, for some reason, none of the players of a difficult level could withstand the surprise of his shot. And all this was because the guy had certain special skills in the same ace. Pointing a strange device at the guy, the girl said, "Stand still." Giving the order, the girl slowly approached the guy and activated the increased skill to increase the attack power by half, and doubled it, as well as the perfect accuracy skill. This skill increased her accuracy to 1%, the next moment she rushed at the guy at high speed. However, the skills that Tae-san earned after the girl struck the wall behind the guy, she heard, "Well, why did you do that?" At the same moment a notification appeared. The skill of nullifying the first attack was used. In response to the boy's question about her sudden actions, Lee Tae-young replied that she just wanted to do it for fun. Zeroing the first attack, the last judgment, the exponential attack, simple time stopping. You have all the skills that can be called cheating. You have 200 of them, I'm right. To which Kang Tae-san replied, dusting himself off, "About 230. Then the girl said to him, "You said you got them in the maze by moving with a special strategy, and I see from your example that we should have studied the maze in more detail while we were there, and we should have concentrated on getting as much power as possible instead of rushing to clear the maze." In response to Lee Tae-young's words, the boy replied, "Who knows? It doesn't matter anymore, because it's all in the past." Hearing her friend's words, the girl sat down in her chair and said, "Well, I don't quite want to say that you are incredible, but if you had chosen the level of difficulty of the hermit from the very beginning, we would have been guaranteed victory." Tae-san's skills were quite high, but the effectiveness of all skills depends on the level of certain statistics. When he heard the girl's words, he suddenly remembered the words of upset people who told him that if you only chose a high level of difficulty, even for a hermit, in other words, Tae-san could not use his skills to even half of their potential. In response to Lee Tae-young's words, Tae-san replied, "Maybe let's not get into the details." Approaching the chair in which she was sitting, the guy sternly said, "You just came back from patrol," and he heard the same thing in response. "Well, if you want it so badly, a new wave will begin soon." Hearing the news, the guy's breath suddenly caught in his throat. However, the next moment he gathered his thoughts, he smiled slyly and said, "So I guess we can't live right." By wave, players mean a massive attack of monsters. With each wave people lost new territories, and even more fighters in the first wave lost soul. But in the second wave, half of the players with a hardcore difficulty level, who represented a considerable combat power, were lost. After the end of the third wave, the territory over which humanity still had control shrank to a small town. When Kang Tae-san heard the news, he asked how many of them there were, and the girl replied that there were 2 S-rank monsters, dozens of A ranks and hundreds of B ranks, and 1 apostle with them. Hearing the information about the composition of the enemies, Kang Tae-san thought, 2 S-rank monsters, even for Lee Tae-young, is a problem, and we have few hardies who can handle A-rank monsters. And there is no point in talking about the apostle. He is much stronger than S ranks. Is defeat impossible to avoid the next moment? He heard. You have to try. I ask you to take on 2 S ranks. When I heard the request from the girl Kang, I was surprised to hear you exclaim that you wanted me to die, to which she replied that I needed to study for the apostle, and you are the only one who can compete with S ranks. You know this very well. Hearing Lee Tae-young's request, the boy said, leaving the room, how did you get me? And then heard you say that you were going to tell the others, and he replied, you need to at least give them the opportunity to prepare mentally, and you want them to die without knowing anything. In response to this, the girl said that maybe it would be for the best if they had time to enjoy life a little bit, and I heard in response that I don't think so. As soon as Kang Tae-san closed the door behind him, the girl, after a short pause, said thoughtfully, Tae-san is quite strong. Perhaps he will lead us to victory. The next moment, clutching the purple stone in her hands, the girl nervously added, I'm a coward myself. After a while the codes for the fourth wave spread around the camp, and some of the residents began to speak in fear, shedding tears. I knew that this day would come one day, but it didn't make it any better. At the same time, Kang Tae-san, who was standing next to Guillaume Junjayan on the wall, asked how you were doing, and he replied, I've already accepted it, and if you look at it that way, we've been holding out in impossible conditions for quite a while. We have even lived longer than some people, and I would say that this is a blessing, and I heard in response, of course you will die. At the same time, seeing Lee Jong-chun down behind the wall, who was in complete shock, the poor man said to Guillaume Junjayan, he went through so much trying to survive and make his way through the maze to get back to Earth, and on the same day he finds out that he has only a little time to live. What a terrible fate. Shifting his gaze to the indifferent Kang Tae-san, he added in surprise, I thought you would be furious. Humanity would not have survived a day without what you did. In response to his friend's words, the guy looked at the ruins of the city and replied, I'll tell you the truth. I'm so angry that it's tearing me up inside. Now I'm happy. Immediately after these words, a tear in the sky appeared somewhere in the city, and silhouettes began to appear. With each passing second, they grew larger and larger until the monsters themselves began to appear from the mysterious portal. Seeing what was happening right in front of him, Junjayan happily said, wow, it's just chaos. Who were you supposed to defeat there? To which he replied, 2S ranks. Having received an answer to his question and seeing that his friend was about to leave, the boy added happily, I'll see you in the next world. It looks like you're going there first, so wait for me. Without answering his friend's words, Kang Tae-san only picked up speed and then activated the long-range jump skill and took off. When he was in the air at a bird's eye view, he activated the next skill called Total Observation. Seeing the skill of observation and assessing the situation on the battlefield upon landing, the guy received a notification that you see horrible creatures in front of you. Looking behind him to see his enemies, he said menacingly, well, are you glad to see me in front of you? At the same time, he began to receive notifications from the system. Mental stability check, self-control check, fear check, instant death check, all checks passed. You have mentally withstood the encounter with terrifying monsters with the help of Iron Will skills. You have unshakable confidence, and your body becomes invulnerable. Finding himself right in front of a pair of S-class monsters, the guy confidently looked into their eyes and said menacingly, get lost, you creatures. Activating his full observation skill again to find the enemy's weaknesses, the boy mentally said, I hope none of them are defensive. But unfortunately, one of the monsters had a plate that read, Monster Type 7 Protective General Health, 148,551,233. After assessing the characteristics of one of his opponents and activating the skill of Accelerated Mobility, the guy said with a grudging smile that 148 million and I would not be able to neutralize him for ages. Stepping back from the first monster, he turned his gaze to another with an observational skill and said, okay, what about this one? Another enemy had a monster number 5, type attacking range total health, 1,255,212, and then the guy added 1 2/10 of a million, but at least it's doable. Rushing into battle against a long-range monster with less health points, Kang Tae-san said in frustration, I don't have a single move on either of them. After cutting off some of the limbs of the attacking monster, the guy saw the damage to the monster 5, 42 points, 32 points damage to the monster 7, 38 points, and then thought about the tentacle's attack reduced. So you have to hit him in the head and then abruptly change your direction and plan of action to win the battle. As soon as he started to approach the enemy, the latter activated his skill and fired a laser beam in the guy's direction. Having come under attack, Kong Tassen used the skill of zeroing the first blow and reduced the damage to 0, after which he mentally said this monster attacks with tentacles that are so fast that it is almost impossible to dodge them. Looking at the trajectory of the monster's next strike, which was right next to him and he could see it with the help of the observation skill, the guy thought, so all I can do is this. It's just about predicting the trajectory. I have only one chance to dodge, but if I calculate the trajectory wrong then trouble can happen. After going through the possible plans of action, the guy used the acceleration skill and began to skillfully wade through the enemy's attacking light beams. Having dealt another blow to the monster after breaking through its line of defense, Kong mentally added that the battle should not be delayed. After hitting the enemy he received a notification that said the damage done to Monster 5 was 48 points. The next moment, noticing that he was going to attack, the guy jumped away from him, but he still had to use his skill of nullifying the second blow to avoid suddenly dying, after which he rushed back into the fight. As soon as he started to approach the attacking monster, he noticed that number 7 defensive monster appeared right in front of him. Then Kong saw that he was defending the second monster. A defensive monster protects a ranged attacking monster because it sees that the latter is in danger and they were specially sent in pairs. After striking a defensive enemy, the guy managed to activate his skill, then he received a notification that you forced the enemy to accept the fight. Immediately afterward, a protective dome opened over the monster and no one could enter or leave it. After activating this skill, when left alone with the enemy, he received a notification for 1 minute, only monster number 7 can attack you. Clutching the sword for battle in his hand, the boy mentally said, if Lee Tae-young had been with me, everything would have been different. She was passing the maze at the hermit level and she had legendary equipment and high characteristics, after which he activated the doubling skill, doubling his strength. The next moment, he received another notification. The multiply attack power skill was activated, the last judgment skill was activated, and the skill bypassed any defensive skills of the opponent. Speaking of her friend, Kong Tassen mentally added that a defensive monster would not be able to hurt Lee Tae-young much, and that was why she would first deal with the attacker. Only with me, it's not like that, as the enemy is coming at him, which has already opened its mouth, the guy added. No matter what kind of monster is attacking or defensive, any of them will destroy me with one blow, having used all his skills to multiply the damage, he said dissatisfiedly. 9604 is still not enough. The next moment he activated the skill overload of the specified skill, after which he locked for 30 days and restarted the multiplication. After activating the multiplication skill for the second time and using some additional skills, he was convinced that his chances of winning had increased slightly. Rushing into battle with the enemy, he confidently exclaimed that first we need to deal with the one with the most health. My skills are the only thing I can rely on. 9604 by 4 is still not enough to get to 100 million, and that's why I had to reach the limit, after which I used the copy skill which allowed me to make the next attack twice. After striking the enemy with his sword, the boy received a notification that the damage done to monster number 7 was 92,236,816 points. Having duplicated the attack with his skill, the guy inflicted even more damage than was necessary for victory and then received a notification that monster number 7 was defeated. Only when the barrier dissipated, a beam of light from the attack of monster number 5 of the attacking type of 22,000 plus came at Kong Tassen. Having suffered a sudden attack, the guy managed to stay on his feet and activated the endurance skill, after which the lethal damage was cancelled and all damage that would be dealt during the next 5 seconds would be nullified. Leaning on his sword to stay on his feet after a heavy blow, he mentally said, I've used up all my attack resets and only have one more stamina left. Now comes the hard and tedious work of hitting, dodging, and so on ad infinitum, except there is one small problem. Looking at his mana supply, he noticed that there were only 21 units left out of 820. Smiling tiredly after seeing what he saw, he added, I have no more skills. I will have to work with ordinary attacks, taking off 1,200,000 total health drop by drop, so I have to hit him 25,000 times. I can't do it. As Kong Tassen continues to fight his hard battle against the enemy, he receives a notification that you are in a state of complete concentration. Your mind and body are one, and a miraculous power has been imprinted on your soul. Since you are not in the maze of gaining the skill, height of concentration is sealed. Seeing that the new skill is not available to him, the guy waved his sword and said, "Shut up, you." Closing the notification window, the guy went back into battle against his enemy, who was at the limit of his capabilities. After a short period of time, after inflicting another 48 points of health on monster number 5, he finally achieved his goal and destroyed monster number 5. Holding his sword in the monster's still body, Kang Tazan breathing heavily raised his head up and then received a message from the gods of all dimensions who cannot contain their admiration for your feat. After taking a little rest after the battle, the boy looked around and thought about how long this battle had been going on, as if a whole month had passed. I have nothing more to do here, so I'll go back, and then headed back to the city where his comrade's fight was to be accepted. Walking through the piles of dead bodies that were scattered everywhere after a hard battle, Kang Tazan felt a strange chill on his skin. Looking around at all the dead on the sides he had crossed paths with and partially knew, the guy said unhappily, "And so many people said that you are the last hard players in this world." With his head down and his teeth gritted, he regretfully added, "Then why was I the only light player left alive?" Recalling those moments when he was still in carefree contact with his jaded comrades, Khan added, "Why did I come back when you all died here?" Also noticing among the fallen soldiers Gao Minjun, the boy added that it looks like you also went to yours as promised. As Kang Tazan sat down to close his friend's eyes, he suddenly saw Tae Young, who was also nearby, staring at the wall. Looking at her motionless and bloody body, which showed no signs of life, he added that Lee Tae Young did as well. The strongest person in the world, the only one who has completed the maze at the level of difficulty of a hermit, she also lost in this battle. As soon as he started to approach the girl, he saw a puddle of unknown substance in front of him, which was full of danger. The next moment, a kind of eye appeared from that substance, attached to the tissues and muscles, and focused its gaze in his direction. Thinking about what was happening, Kang Tazan mentally said that the apostle then received a message that it was looking at you, your death is near. Having deactivating the intimidation effect imposed by the monster protagonist angrily shouted, "Shut up and get out of here." The next moment activating his new concentration skill he swung his sword and dealt an incredibly large amount of damage to the enemy. After striking the enemy once, the guy confidently exclaimed, "Come here, you rascal." However, the difference in strength was felt very strongly, and the enemy at one point pierced the guy with its tentacle, lifting him somewhere in the sky. Feeling an incredibly strong pain that pierced his body, the guy mentally said looking at the enemy from below, "Is this the end?" When the health decision slipped to a critical level, Kang Tazan received a notification that said, "Your health is 0. The activated, resilient skill, invisible power will save your life for 1 minute. When he saw that his life would continue to go on because of the skill, the guy grabbed his wound and angrily shouted, "Bastards, let me die in peace. I can't feel my own legs. This thing must have pierced me through my heart and spine." But resilience only postpones the effect of inevitable death. It does not heal fatal wounds sustained in battle with rivals. Having lost all lust for life, the guy looked down at his head and said disappointedly, "I'll be dead in 1 minute." And it seems that the monster knows it, too, from the curse. If only in the past, when I was faced with the choice of my future, I hadn't chosen a low level of difficulty to complete the maze. Then even at a normal level, I would have definitely remembered myself as a young boy, but no. When his head began to overwhelm with all sorts of emotions, the guy began to scratch the ground with trembling hands and angrily say, "Useless idiots." Remembering all the bloody bodies he had seen on the way here, the guy angrily exclaimed, "It's all your fault. You didn't even try to level up more carefully when you were going through the maze. You all went out of it as fast as possible and rejoiced in how you could be so weak, even though you were on normal and high difficulty." Remembering also my friend Jim Jun Jin and Lee Jong Chun, whom Kang Tasan defeated in a duel by pounding his fist on the ground, I would exclaim angrily, "If you tried at least half as hard as I did." Raising his head to look again at everything that was happening in front of him, the guy barely held back his tears and said, "We could definitely do it." The next moment he ran to the ground and smiled happily, accepting his fate and thought, "It doesn't matter. It's all in the past. I made my choice. There's no point in blaming others for anything. Our humanity would have come to an end anyway, but he finished his thought when he saw a bright glow from the hands of the girl to whom the monster was approaching. When he saw a strange thing in her hands that emitted a strange light, the boy wondered what it was. As he slowly began to crawl toward Lee Tae-young, the boy wondered in his head if she was protecting an object. Hearing a strange noise, the monster immediately turned back, noticing the guy crawling toward him, and then snarled and then heard an order to stop. After activating the last chance skill, Kong Taesan gained the ability to use one of his skills without any restriction. Immediately after, he said stop the flow of time, as a result of which he received a notification and activated the skill simple stop time within a radius of 100 meters. Time stopped, slowly approaching the girl. Kong Taesan crawled to the right place and then opened his hand with a stone and said look. In the description of the magic stone in Lee Tae-young's hands, it was written Bizarre of Ouroboros, Bizarre of the gods, controls the cycle of life of the universe, and a single use brings one person back to the past. Seeing what he had in his hand, the boy was surprised to find himself back in the past. But why Lee Tae-young? After activating the ability of the stone he took from the girl and restoring the flow of time, the guy saw a monster coming towards him, but he smiled happily and said confidently, bye. Moving into the future, the boy saw himself as a small boy cornered in a dead end, curled up in a ball with his arms around his knees, listening to Kong Taesan say, "You're a worthless idiot. Why were you even born into this world?" Recalling these words, which were often said to him, the boy thought, when I was little, my parents needed me only to take out their anger. I believed their words no matter how horrible they were, and I also believed in the insignificance of my existence, and because of this weakness, I chose a low difficulty level when I was faced with a choice in the monster invasion. Ever since then, time has not stood still, and I have changed a lot. Now I know for sure that I am not worthless as they said, and that I definitely have abilities. When he saw a bright light in an unknown space in front of him, he closed his eyes so that it would not blind him, and then opened his eyes and found himself in his room in the house. Not realizing whether what he was seeing was actually happening to him, the guy reached for his phone and mentally said, I really went back in time. When he unlocked the phone he saw that it was 11-0-2-12-31-2019. When he was convinced that he was really not in a dream, he began to recall the terrible times when it all happened, and it happened on the 1st of January 2020. No one could have imagined that something so unpredictable and horrific would happen at the very beginning of the new year. While tasting the pizza he received in honor of the new year, the guy happily said, "Oh my God, I haven't eaten it for a long time, it just tastes like luxury." Continuing to enjoy the benefits of earthly civilization while it was still possible, he added in his mind that after the apocalypse we would have nothing to eat but potatoes and monsters. After finishing his festive meal and wiping his mouth, Kong Taesan thought, I could not have imagined that Lee Tae-young had a magical object that could turn back time. However, there is still one question that cannot leave my mind and has been on my mind lately, why she did not use it until the last moment. As far as I know her, she would definitely use this magic stone and hide somewhere, but this is just my guess, I can't be sure. Looking at his phone, which showed that the new year would start in 2 minutes, the guy mentally added that it would start very soon. As the last seconds of the countdown sounded, fireworks began to explode everywhere and people around the world were happily counting down the last hours until the new year. Everyone was happily preparing for the holiday, receiving and giving gifts and welcoming guests, hoping that everything would be much better in the new year. But unfortunately everyone was very wrong in the new year, and when the clock struck 12 the whole world turned into something horrible. Hearing some strange noise, a man walking on the street said in surprise, "Hey, did you hear that sound just now?" And was told that it must be a show somewhere. As soon as the hour hand pointed to 12, a bright red light appeared in the sky that no one could ignore, and the man looked up and asked what it was. At the same moment the sky parted and some unknown claws and giant glowing eyes began to poke out of it. Standing on the balcony of his apartment and looking at this sight again, Kong Taesan heard what the monster was. Looking at the monster climbing out of the portal that opened in the sky, the boy mentally said at that moment, I was quite scared, me and everyone else, but now I know what it was, just a monster in the rank of a hard player. Such a monster does not pose a threat. But isn't it about time we all received a notification from the system? He finished his thought and a system window appeared right in front of him. The same thing appeared in front of every person in the world, and it said, congratulations. Your world is threatened with destruction due to the invasion of hostile beings, and any weapon you have invented is useless against them. However, you have nothing to fear as long as people read the notifications received by the system. A B-class monster has already broken into the human world. With each passing second, more and more system windows appeared with information about what was happening, and in them a merciful deity was riding over the ramparts. And it was this deity who decided to give you the only chance to survive in this world in these difficult times. All of you will be given your own choice, and after making it, you will all end up in the same place called the maze. So in order for you to gain the power to be able to confront monsters, you must clear it, after which you will be moved from it with certain abilities gained. At the same time Kong Tassin, heading to meet the fleeing people in the direction of the monster, said with a grudging aha. Very merciful. There are no words to express the full range of gratitude. Looking at the window with the choice of the difficulty level of the maze, the boy added with a grudging smile that this deity wanted to enjoy the spectacle. Well, if it wants it so badly, then let's go. Activating the window for selecting the difficulty, the guy moved to a room with a door. At the same time, a description of each level appeared above it with illustrations that said easy difficulty level. On each level you will have access to a lot of food and safe places. Even mediocre and weak players can pass this difficulty level if they try. The normal difficulty level at this level is the difficulty of getting food, and the number of safe places is much lower. It is much harder to survive at this level, but if you do not get frustrated and try your best, you will definitely succeed. Hard difficulty. This difficulty level will put you through a pretty tough test of food, and there are very few safe spots on it. On this monsters will fight with you until their last breath, and all in order to destroy you. If you fail to find a safe place, you face a terrible death. And the last mode is Hermit. At this difficulty level you will go through the maze in complete solitude. You will not be able to meet anyone from your world on your way, and you will only encounter hostile monsters and NPCs on the road. Your luck, insight and wisdom will be put to an impossible test, and at this level your probability of survival is 0. If your life is important to you, we strongly recommend that you do not choose this level of difficulty. Seeing what he needed, Kong Tassin entered the Hermit's level and smiled happily and said, "You're there, I'm right, so wait for me." Heading toward the bright white light that appeared in front of him, the boy received a system notification that said, "You have chosen the Hermit difficulty mode. We wish you success." The next moment the boy was transported to a city where he was to begin his adventure of passing the labyrinth on the difficulty of a hermit. Looking around he mentally said, "Oh, nostalgia, how familiar everything is here, I just can't help but think about it." Bending his head down and smiling happily, the boy added in his head how many years had passed since that time, and here I am again. Hearing the sound of the notification, the guy opened the player's dialogue and said in surprise that there was already a message in the general chat. I don't know who it was, but he thinks pretty fast. For me, chat is the only way to communicate with people who have chosen other difficulty levels. With the help of chat, all players could share experiences and ask questions, so everyone helped each other out. When the player asked where they would end up, Kong Tassin only wished him good luck, and then closed the chat, mentally saying that I would need the chat a little later, but for now there was no point in communicating with anyone. Heading to the very beginning where it all started, he thought about what I need to check now, and then suddenly remembered the dialogue with Lee Tae-young where he was asked by Tassin what NPCs are on the light. Thinking about the question, the guy answered that ordinary NPS talk with programmed phrases, and what other ones did you have, to which the girl replied yes, others, after which he asked in surprise, really, what kind of ones? Then looking up from her meal, the girl said, well, how can I explain it to you? They have intelligence and move freely of their own accord. It seems as if these are real people. During his recollections, Kong Tassin has already arrived at the meeting place. Looking at the familiar guy, he mentally said the gatekeeper of the maze was at a low level. He was an ordinary gray-haired old man. At the same moment the guy said, well, you've already come, so. Honestly, I thought it would take you 30 days to get here. The boy smiled nervously and thought to himself. Feeling the oppressive aura of power of the guy who was supposed to help him, Kong thought he was much stronger than Lee Tae-young, and he was just a goalkeeper. Rising to his feet and starting to stretch his neck, the maze gatekeeper named Broken Man said, well, first of all, I'm Broken Man, I'm the maze gatekeeper, and my task is to bring you up to speed. Hearing the name of the guy who introduced himself to him, Kang was surprised to ask you, your name is Broken Man, and he replied that those who died at this level of difficulty without completing the maze become goalkeepers, which is cool, really. I think you already know what is happening in your world. Chaos destruction monsters go through the maze as an opportunity given to you by an omnipotent being. You wonder why we were given such mercy, but if humanity were simply destroyed, it would at least be painless. Hearing the words of the labyrinth gatekeeper, Kang Tae-san thought to himself, he speaks as if he had actually gone through all this himself. Lee Hae-young was right. Watching the guy standing in front of him, Kang Tae-san added in his head, NPCs on hermit mode are real people. They are former inhabitants of destroyed worlds. Seeing that the newcomer was looking at him with a steady gaze, showing no emotion, Broken Man was surprised to think that with this guy his world was being destroyed there, and he was as calm as a rock. Of course I would be very happy to knock him on the pot and then explain everything here and there, but I doubt he will react to it. The next moment, pointing to a passage in the wall, Broken Man said, this is the gateway to the labyrinth. Some people call it a tower, but you can call it whatever you want. In a labyrinth of 100 floors, every 10 floors the atmosphere will change, the food and the driver will change, and you will have to look for any necessary information yourself, and you will get it all in the same way. After hearing a short introductory course in which he learned nothing useful, Kang Tae-san asked in surprise what was really going on. Having received the question, he asked another person who wanted to go through the labyrinth. Broken Man said with a yawn, what else can I tell you about what awaits you on each floor in the labyrinth? You will meet a merchant, and he will tell you everything. At the same moment, Kang remembered the words of his friend who had angrily said in their conversation that he was such a rude goalkeeper, and if you expressed dissatisfaction with him, he would beat you up. I almost died before even entering the maze. Just as he was about to begin his journey, the gatekeeper said to him, wait a minute. I have to give you something that you will need for the first time in the maze. Pulling a cloak and a sword from his inventory, Broken Man grabbed the entire spear and began to swing it. He made several skillful movements and delivered a precise blow to Kang Tae-san, but at the last moment stopped his weapon right before contact. However, what happened surprised the goalkeeper very much. The guy standing right in front of him did not react at all to his attempt to harm him. Then he took his ZRY and smiled happily and said, here you go, and then handed the boy a leather armor and a sword. Looking at the item he had received from the gatekeeper, Kang Tae-san saw a system notification that said, worn leather armor defense +1 can protect against minor scratches, rusty sword attack, +1 will break soon. Immediately afterwards he added, but it's made of bronze, to which Broken Man replied with a displeased look, what's wrong with that? And then said no. The next moment, when he noticed that the goalkeeper was thinking, Kang Tae-san asked him if something had happened, but he heard nothing. Then finally he received another item that was thrown to him with the words, and he also took it, a worn leather bracelet that gave 1 point of protection, which had been used for a long time and had already lost its properties, but could save him at least from the monster's bite. Looking at the additional item he was handed, he wondered what it was and wondered what Lee Tae-young hadn't mentioned such a bracelet. Upon completion of the distribution of items before the journey, Broken Man pointed in the direction behind him and said, you also gained a few skills in something else, so you'll see it when you get to the maze. To which he replied, thank you very much. When Kang Tae-san headed for the maze, the goalkeeper said goodbye to him, well, good luck there. As soon as he was alone again at the entrance, Broken Man mentally recalled the guy he had just said goodbye to, and mentally said that the guy was smiling as if he wanted to enter the maze as soon as possible. In my time as a gatekeeper at the hermit level of difficulty, I have met many genes, but none of them have been able to overcome the maze. However, this guy who has just entered the room to take the test is definitely not like all the previous brave men, he is different. Perhaps the point here is not how much experience the person who wants to get into the maze has, but rather something more substantiated. And this something is the lust for life. Sitting at the gate waiting for newcomers or the return of old ones from the maze, Broken Man said it would have been good enough if he had survived. After walking a certain distance from the entrance, the boy noticed that a system window with information appeared in front of him. In this window, it was reported that the labyrinth was created by a great sorcerer from very distant times, and it is said that whoever passes the labyrinth will have one of his wishes fulfilled. But this world in the labyrinth is isolated, and no one from the outside can enter it or come to help. In this world terrible creatures move silently and kill all living things. Everything in this world is against you. However, if by some miracle you do manage to survive in this terrible world and go through this dark and terrible hell, you will have eternal glory. While the guy was rereading the information from the system notifications, he was transferred to the first location, after which the system reported the first entrance to the maze over the top. The monsters that inhabit this world are dying from stabbing blows. They are not as strong as they seem. Seeing that he was at the very beginning of the maze, Kong Tassin confidently said, "Well, let's get started." Stepping into the room, he received a system notification announcing the start of the main quest. There are quite a few mysterious places in the maze after clearing the floor. The reward depends on the number of secrets explored on the first floor of the quest. Taking a few more steps forward, the boy received another system notification that said, "Kill the first floor boss and get higher reward for clearing potions, increase random characteristic reward for discovering secrets is unknown." After starting the quest and exploring the room, Kong Tassin suddenly remembered his conversation with a girl who asked him if he had a Tassin merchant on the light level of the dungeon, to which he replied, "Of course, is there a difficulty on which he is not?" Having received information about the trader, the girl asked him what he was like, and he replied, "An ordinary trader. Nothing special about him, I bought potions from him." When she heard what he was spending his savings on, the girl said, "It's not like that in the hermit mode, where the merchant has a huge assortment," to which Kong replied, "You're bragging again." At the same time, she took off the armband from her left arm and demonstrated a rare item saying, "Look, the black bracelet is a pretty powerful artifact, it reduces damage by 50%. After evaluating the item he was shown and understanding the information, Tassin asked in surprise that the merchant was really selling something like this. In response to his question, he heard that there were actually many more interesting things there, but I couldn't afford it. I didn't earn enough gold to buy other items. If you could really buy everything from the best merchant, you would be even stronger than me." While recalling the dialogue with the girl, the boy had already arrived at the first door of the maze floor. Having opened the first door, he came across to explore as many secrets as possible and collect as much as he could. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time, but now it directly affects me. As soon as he entered the room, he noticed an elderly man in front of him, and then received a system notification. "You have met the Lost King," and at the same time the king said to the boy that you had already arrived. Coming closer to the man, Khan said, "Congratulations." Khan was surprised to hear him reply in a surprised tone that he was a well-mannered young man. "Well, let's start with your name." When the man asked you a question, the boy replied, "Tez-san." "You are a traitor," and he answered, "Let's say." When he received an affirmative answer from the man he met in the first room, Tez-san said, "I just don't see anything in the windows, and it surprises me a little." After receiving a remark from a visitor who arrived at his shop, the man stroking his beard said, "I would be a fool to start displaying my goods. I wouldn't even need a whole floor, which is why you don't see anything in the windows, which you understand." Taking his pipe into his mouth, the man added unhappily, "I have no intention of showing you my treasures like this." When he heard the radical answer of the trader Khan Tez-san, he was surprised to hear a trader who does not trade anything, and then asked, "How is this possible? Then why are you here?" Following the question from the newcomer, the Lost King pounded his fists on the table and exclaimed angrily, "Do you really think I'm here of my own free will? I've lost everything because of this madness that happened to my world, and I'm forced to spend my life here." After his rather emotional exclamation, the man suddenly became quiet and then with a short pause said, "I'm not going to show my treasures to an impudent person like you," to which he replied, "Of course." The next moment pointing to the passage behind him, pipe in hand, he added, "But if you can demonstrate what you're made of, then things can certainly change." As soon as Khan Tez-san turned his gaze to the path that was being shown to him, he heard the words, "Come back alive, and then you will be able to see my best work." When he heard the requirement for him to use the store, the boy looked at the shopkeeper and thought, "So I just need to survive so that I can buy something from him," and then asked, "I understand that this is the only requirement. When asked by a traveler who came to clear the maze, the Lost King smiled nervously and said, "You are quite a strange fellow." After standing in front of the merchant for a while, Tezsan suddenly said, "Do I have to clear the whole labyrinth in order to use your shop?" To which the merchant replied, "Of course not," and then the boy added, "Then I left." Looking in the wake of the strange boy who confidently walked into the clutches of danger, the Lost King wondered in his mind what was wrong with him. Usually they look at the descent into the dungeon and shake with fear, not daring to enter, so why is he so confident? I have a strange feeling that he has no sense of fear at all. I wonder if such people exist in this world at all. Comfortably seated in his chair, the man said sweetly, stretching, "Well, it doesn't matter anyway, because he won't be coming back from there anyway, I'm sure of it." Picking up his sword to be ready in case of danger, Kong Tezsan walked down the corridor and mentally said, "This is a normal corridor, and at the end of the room the first floor is arranged with a cash register, just like the light floor, but so far I don't see any danger. But of course I'm wrong. Just because I don't see the danger doesn't mean it's not there." The next moment, hearing a noise behind him, the boy looked back and saw red eyes slowly approaching from the darkness. The very monster that first met him in the maze was a giant rat that was clearly not friendly. Noticing the system window that reported the enemy as moving quite fast, Khan exclaimed in surprise that it was a giant rat. At low levels the giant rat was a 5th floor boss, but here it is just a regular mobs, through which it notifies you of the damage it has done with a bite of 10 units. Realizing that the battle had already begun, the guy looked at the enemy with a disdainful look and said in his head, "A giant rat has a rather low level of defense. However, this is of course compensated for by this disadvantage. This monster has incredibly high speed and is constantly lost from sight, even when we all fight it for quite a while." Khan tried to strike at the enemy who bit him, but failed in his attempt. The guy thought about it and added that this is an ordinary mob in the hermit mode, so now I see the difference between the difficulty of the levels. Looking at the monster that dodged his sword and jumped back, Kong Tsan said in disappointment, "He's as fast as I remember. On the easy level of difficulty, we had to spend a lot of time catching it, and we spent a long time catching it together until it was exhausted." The next moment, opening his characteristics window to see what he had at the moment, the guy mentally added, "But now I'm alone and my characteristics are even lower than they were then, so logically I can't beat her. I also remember Lee Tae-young telling me that she just ran away from these monsters because she was so bad with the number of them in her case." In other words, none of the hermit players have ever even fought the giant rats on the ground floor. After reflecting on the situation and recalling the stories of his friend, Kong Tsan smiled slyly and said, "Well, now I understand how things work here." Rushing at the enemy with a sword to make him tired of running away, the boy confidently said in his head that the principle of rewards in this maze was quite simple. Rewards here are also distributed accordingly if the player achieves something that others cannot achieve at the same time. The guy again received a system notification about receiving 8 points of damage with a bite. Swinging his sword again and driving the rat away from him, which had gotten a hold of his limb, Kong Tsan added in his mind, either he would perform some feat that would earn him respect. Then, the rewards should be appropriate, and my goal to become the strongest was to drive my sword right in front of the enemy's head immediately after the reflection was completed. Seeing that the danger continued to approach, the giant rat began to step back more to prevent being hit, while Kong continued to follow the monster, thinking I can't keep up with him, so I just need to predict where he will run. Having cornered his opponent, Kong Tsan noticed that he began to tremble and tried to intimidate him with his growling. At the same moment, the boy realized that he was slowly reaching his goal and said in his head that he was a living being, and therefore, like any living being, he could be studied. Looking for the slightest change in the monster's behavior, he added in his head the contraction of each muscle in the enemy's limb and a deep breath. Having noticed that the enemy was in a difficult situation, the guy finally achieved his goal and then received a system notification that said the giant rat was frightened and the enemy's thinking processes slowed down. Realizing that he had gained the advantage in this fight, the guy said in his head, "Now it will be much harder for her to react to what is happening now. I am covering my ankles from her attack, which is why she will use the easiest and most vulnerable target." Concentrating his attention on the wrist with the protective bracelet, the guy mentally added that she doesn't jump very high, which is why the closest target for her will be. The next moment, after the monster's attention was distracted, it jumped at the boy aiming at the exact spot he had predicted. Being dared by the enemy to follow his instructions to attack the planned place, Kong Tezin raised his hand in the air and confidently said, "That's it. Now you're definitely finished." The next moment, a rat screamed and then the guy started receiving system notifications that said, "You have struck a giant rat. Immobilized it. This increases the amount of damage done. For units of damage to the giant rat you have dealt 5 units of damage." After the battle and the victory in the duel, Kong Tezin naturally went back to the Lost King and after a while arrived there. Holding the rewards from the monster in his hands, the guy said, "I came back at the same time he received a system notification. The meat of a giant rat, if there is nothing else to eat, you can use it." At the same time, Kong Tezin, for some reason, remembered the words of one of the loner players who told him about the Lost King from the lips of one of them. "You saw this merchant. That old bastard. Why is he so difficult to bargain with? He's so stubborn." These messages were posted in the general chat. Some of them were even left by Li Tae-young, who said that you have the same thing. He is a traitor, but why doesn't he behave like other traitors? Recalling the moments of attempts to cooperate with the old Lost King, the girl added, "Sometimes I want to give him a facelift several times, but I know what I can get for it." At the same time, Kong Tezin arrived at the merchant's house, and seeing the boy, he dropped his pipe and exclaimed in surprise that he was alive. Hearing the question from the vendor, the guy was surprised to hear him ask what was going on, and he asked if he didn't want me to come back, to which the vendor nervously exclaimed, "Of course not." The next moment 2 items appeared on the merchant's table, giant rat meat with a 96% quality, which could be eaten if nothing else was available, and giant rat skin with a 95% quality, which was a hide with rather warm fur. Looking at the goods, Kong Tezin asked, "You buy goods from travelers, right? Then how much can I get for this?" The king replied in surprise that you killed her, not ran away from her, but killed her, and he replied, "What is so surprising about that?" Hearing that he had indeed been able to finish off the monster, the Lost King thought in his head, and indeed it was the meat and skin of a giant rat, and of the highest quality, so he acted quite carefully without a huge number of chaotic blows. Turning his gaze to Kong Tezin, who was standing in front of him waiting for the price of the goods, the merchant added in his head, "I wonder how a newcomer can produce such a thing." The next moment, smiling happily, the Lost King said, "Well, it's okay. You passed the test, that's why I'll show you my goods." And then he said, "What do you have in stock?" And then he answered, "Everything, just tell me what you want." Thinking about what he really needed at the moment, the guy confidently said, "Do you have a siege shield?" When the Lost King heard the boy's wish, he said, "A siege shield means a tall one, which is correct," and in response he heard exactly the same as the biggest one you have at the moment, and then added with interest, "Why do you need a shield?" In response to the merchant's question, the boy confidently remarked, "Imagining fighting monsters, I realized that I wanted to crush my enemies." As soon as Kong Tezin replied about using the desired equipment, the Lost King smiled and said happily, "Wow, that's right." Immediately after touching the wall behind him, he said to open the golden door, and a bright golden glow appeared in the wall in front of the man. Putting his hand into that golden glow, the merchant took out the desired item and asked how he liked it in his hands. He held a large siege shield that added 1 point of attack and 5 points of defense, and had the ability to block various types of blows. When the merchant held out the shield to the guy, he was surprised to think that it was much higher than I expected at a low level of difficulty, and that equipment of this quality could only be obtained at the 7th level. Having demonstrated the desired object, the old man put the shield on the arrow and said, "You owe me 500 gold pieces." And then, hearing the price, Kong Tezin thought, "I only have 234, and I need almost as much more, so I'll probably have to come back later." Heading for the exit of the room, the guy mentally said, 7 giant rats and the shield will be mine. And then he heard, "Hey, where are you going?" To which he replied, "I need more gold." Then picking up the shield and throwing it into the boy's hands, the merchant exclaimed, "Don't worry, I'm giving it to you for nothing." And then he received a notification that you had received a giant siege shield. The next moment, noticing that the man began to pull out some potions and other materials from his golden door, Kong Tezin heard, "You have about 250 gold coins." "I'm right. I have something you can buy with this money. Wait. Observing the strange behavior of the lost king, Kong Tezin said in amazement in his head, trying to gather his thoughts together, what was going on here? Why such a favor? Looking at the table with the various goods that appeared on the table in front of him, the boy added that it was not at all like Li Tae-young had told me earlier. Observing the men's strange behavior, the boy was surprised to hear him say, wait, why are you helping me so much? And the man replied, just look, you're doing him good, so can't you give him a gift or something? You can think of it as my investment in myself. Hearing the lost king's explanation of the sudden generosity, Kong Tezin asked in surprise what investment he meant by that. At the same time, having gathered all the goods in one pile, the merchant said, come on, choose any of these potions you can afford. And the boy thought no, he did not want to explain his motives. Walking closer to the table and picking up one of the potions, he saw a system notification with the inscription, the treatment potion restores 50% of health. The price is 200 gold pieces. The guy thought, I wonder if most of the goods he offers me now are potions. Some of them temporarily increase strength. There are also potions that increase speed for a certain period of time, and other things that are quite important when passing the maze. Starting to carefully examine the goods on the table in front of him, Khan added mentally, but I need something else at the moment. Recalling the words of his friend Tezin, I added in my head that in solitary mode, potions are difficult to access and are usually reserved for floors above. Thinking about what he should choose from the assortment, he added in his head that he did not need them at the moment, and that buying them could backfire. However, I have a slightly different priority. Then the boy turned his attention to a set of weapons that stood near the table, where there was a bow that increased accuracy by 20%, and a set of arrows that increased attack by 1 unit. Seeing a situation with other monsters with whom a direct confrontation could bring bad consequences, he thought, I definitely need a long-range weapon. If I have a bow, I can prevent many unnecessary situations. Taking all his savings out of his wallet, Khan asked how much he would give for a rat's skin, to which he replied that it was of a quality of about 70 gold pieces. Then, holding out his hand with the money, the boy confidently said, I'll sell it and take your bow and a set of arrows for it. Hearing about the choice the traveler had made among all the goods on offer, the man blossomed with joy and began to smile happily. He handed the desired set of goods to the boy and said, here you go, and took the purchased goods. Khan looked at the merchant cautiously and wondered what was wrong with him. Something really changed in him the next moment, and handing Tez-san another bow after the arrows, the man said, you know that health does not recover in the labyrinth, right? Then the lost king added that on the ground floor there is a place where you can restore your health. It is called a living spring. You can use it as many times as you like, but only if you are on the ground floor. I will show you where it is. Opening the map and putting a marker with a renewable spring on it, the man said, I marked it on your map. It's protected by an old man, but I think you won't have any problems with it. Hearing the favor the merchant had just done, Khan Tez-san mentally said, and Li Taeyang also told him about the source, but mixed it with some insults and wishes to hide there and die of hunger. Heading to the spring marked on the map, the guy added in surprise, wondering why the trader talks to me in a completely different way, perhaps he judges us by our actions. This option is quite likely because Li Taeyang was unable to kill the giant rat and simply ran away from the battlefield from the monster. However, unlike her, I was able to return back, even defeat the enemy, bring the materials I had gotten from him, and even remain unharmed. Holding his shield in his hands as he approached the area where the monsters might appear again, Kong Tez-san wondered in his head if that was why he treated us so differently. After using his shield, and striking with it only once, the boy received a system notification that the giant rat is immobilized and will suffer increased damage, 4 points, 5 points, the enemy is defeated. The next moment he thought, there are still many questions I still don't know the answer to, and then received a notification that said the skill was activated. Recalling the very moment of killing his first monster, he mentally said, when I killed a giant rat, a whole bunch of different notifications immediately appeared in front of me, all of which were related to this event. Then, in addition to the usual standard skills, I was able to acquire skills that could only be obtained on the 20th and 40th floors, at a low level of difficulty. Recalling the moment of clearing the system notifications after the monster was destroyed, he was surprised to say that he did not know I would get such abilities, and the first floor is a giant pupil. Oh, and what is this? But it was the same thing right in front of him. Kang Tae-zin saw a system notification with the inscription Soul Skill, Otherworldly Intervention Skill, 100%. Your soul has reached a new level. Every time your soul wins, it will steal your opponent's power. Then he remembered his past, where he also received a system notification that said, you have entered a state of complete concentration. Your body and consciousness are now united, your soul has been imprinted with a miraculous power, and you have gained the skill of otherworldly intervention. The next moment he also mentioned the negative part of this case that came with the system notification. Since you are no longer in the maze of getting the skill cancelled, the skill otherworldly intervention is closed. After he finished recalling how he learned the skill in his past life, the boy mentally recalled the time when I fought that S-class monster. And then, with a huge effort, I knocked out 1 2/10 million total health. The system window appeared at that moment. I was too exhausted and didn't even pay enough attention to whether the skill opened because I was in the maze again. Trying to gather his thoughts to realize what had happened to him, the boy thoughtfully said that it turns out that even though I had returned in time, I was still able to keep my skills. But I didn't know the answer to this question and couldn't find it, so the only thing I could do was just move forward with my goal. Having found himself on the final line to the place he needed, the guy opened the map and said the source of life should be somewhere at the end of this corridor. But it was long. Having overcome some part of his journey, the guy heard someone squeaking, after which another monster appeared from the darkness. Then a notification appeared in front of Khan. You see a giant rat. Looking at the monster he met on the road, the guy said unhappily that it was obvious that in a long corridor it was impossible not to meet someone. The next moment he received another notification that said you were in a rather difficult situation, and then he looked back and saw a couple more enemies. After completing the inspection and assessment of the situation, he realized that the situation was not the best for him, and he would have to do his best not to die. After counting the number of monsters, the boy thought, although I am bigger than them, even with their small brains, rats realized that the 3 of them are much stronger. The next moment the guy gathered his thoughts and instantly took out his siege shield and completed the concentration test and the test of absence of fear. After completing all the checks, the guy pointed his shield at the enemy and began to confidently move it to take advantage of the effect of a surprise attack. Using his shield after closing in and forcing one of the enemies to retreat, he thought, now I just don't have a chance to make a mistake. I've seen too many strong players in my time who were ruined by indecision. As soon as he moved to decisive action, a couple of monsters behind him also did not hesitate and rushed into the battle. Then Khan received a system notification saying, you have gained the skill Unshakable Consciousness. Unshakable characteristics are increased. As soon as he gained the ability to resist enemies, he was able to easily repel the attack of a pair of giant rats that were approaching him from behind. Having destroyed one of the enemies with the help of the shield, the guy mentally said successful checks and increased characteristics. Now I can easily match the rats in reaction speed and catch them. After dealing with a couple of enemies behind him, the guy received a notification that you had defeated 2 large rats, your level was raised, and he breathed a sigh of relief. When most of the attacking team is defeated, Khan Tae-zin receives another notification saying that the giant rat is scared and the monster's mind is clouded. Seeing that his opponent had rushed at him without any hesitation, the boy raised his shield over his head and smiled slyly, saying, thank you for saving me time. Some time after the end of the battle, the guy finally got to the source of recovery, and then received a notification that he had entered the safe zone of the maze. Enemies cannot get here. It is so safe that you can be lazy. You were the first to see the beauty of a living spring. For the title of Discoverer, you get a bonus, your intelligence level increased by 1, mana level increased by 2, then the guy went to the water to recover. As he approached the pond and took the water in his hands, the boy tasted it, and then thought that the labyrinth was almost everywhere teeming with monsters, except for the merchant's shop and the spring, which were safe places. After tasting the healing water, Khan Tae-zin felt a strange effect that swept through his body and then received a system notification that said, you have fully restored all your vitals. Feeling a rather interesting effect from the spring, the boy was surprised to think how refreshing it was. The stoma just melts away, as if I had a long and sound sleep, but I really need to sleep because the mental stoma will only increase if I continue on my way. The next day, after a sound and healthy sleep, Kang Tae-san woke up and immediately reached for the system window, saying, "It's been a whole day. I'll check the chat. I'm sure someone has written something." The first message in the group chat was written by Kang Jun-hyuk, a player named Hermit, who said, "Someone tell me if I should enter the maze." In response to the first question, another player named Lee Tae-young wrote, "Considering that no one who entered the maze responds, it's probably better not to, I'm going crazy." At the same time, Kang Dong-jun, a player of the normal difficulty level, asked who wants to clear the first floor with me, trying to assemble a team or at least find out more information. The guy added, "Can you tell me which monster will be the first?" The following message was written by Lee himself, a hermit. "I'm just going to go crazy." Seeing the active discussion in the chat room, Kang Tae-san mentally said, "I knew it. I knew most of the messages in the chat room from hermits at other difficulty levels. People have the opportunity to communicate directly with each other, but hermits only chat." Also, when he saw a message from Lee Tae-young asking people what to do, he was surprised to see the always confident Lee Tae-young so confused and whether she was confident at all. Recalling the moment of viewing the girl's characteristics in his past life, the guy mentally said, "When she showed her characteristics, I saw that despite her behavior, she was anxious. Perhaps she was a coward who skillfully hid under a mask of confidence until the very end." After counting the total number of players who wrote to the chat, Kang thoughtfully said in his head, "Only one day after the maze opens, hermit players will begin to arrive more en masse no sooner than a month later. Now humanity is mostly still alive." Deciding that he couldn't just leave it at that, the guy decided to post a message in the general chat where he wrote a reward for the hermits corresponding to their level of difficulty. After sending his message in the general time, the guy mentally said that although she missed a huge number of rewards, she was the fastest to defeat the last boss and thus became the strongest among people. At the same moment Kang Tae-san's message appeared to other participants who were waiting for someone's sign to act. Sending a message to the general chat with information on the ground floor, he confidently added that if I were them, I would not trust everything written on the wall. Having finished viewing the new messages, the guy sipped deliciously after a sweet dream and said, "Even if they believe it, I don't know how they will act. Only Lee Tae-young will survive out of 10,000 hermit players." After closing the general chat and pulling out the sword he had received from the guard, Kang Tae-san confidently said, "Well, now it's time for me to go." After cutting up and bathing the meat of a giant rat in living water, which was 86% quality, the boy decided to use it for its intended purpose, to eat, if nothing else. Holding this strange meat at the level of his eyes, the guy said thoughtfully, "I'll try to think about my goal and maybe it will taste a little better then." After putting the meat of a giant rat in his mouth, chewing and swallowing it, the guy received a notification that you ate a raw piece of meat and then he felt sick. The next moment, the boy received several system notifications, which informed him that the result was negative and that he was poisoned. He began to drink the meat he had poisoned with living water so that he wouldn't suddenly die, and mentally said to himself that food poisoning constantly takes away health points for 2 days, and if you don't periodically drink an antidote or regeneration potion, you can die. For a beginner who knows absolutely nothing about this maze, poisoning can be a real nightmare and lead to a very high probability of death. Wiping his face after drinking the living water and fully restoring all the indicators, the guy thought with a sigh of relief, and that is why people who have experienced this will write in the chat that you cannot eat food without heat treatment. There is only one huge drawback to the maze. Food is rarely found in the maze, after which he began to repeat the same thing and eat rat meat again. Slowly savoring the pieces of meat cut from the carcass, Khan mentally said to the vendor, "You can buy a travel pack, but it's quite expensive and there are very few of them available." After checking his health, the boy made sure he was not affected by the effect of poisoning. After checking his condition, he added in his head, "And that's why the monsters of the maze will be the only most affordable way to eat," after which he took another bite of meat and got rat poisoning. After using the living water to remove all the negative effects and restore his stats, Kang Tae-san thought that sometimes a player is forced to eat raw meat even when he is in danger, and that's when it's really the worst case scenario. After completing another healing with water, the boy mentally rubbed his lips and said, "Well, I'm almost full," and then suddenly received a notification that said, "You have developed immunity from the poisoning you experienced." You've gained a skill that activates under certain circumstances for a long period of time, as well as immunity from diseases. Looking at the skill he had just gained, which said, skill activated under certain circumstances for a long time, immunity to diseases. Skill 1% currently available, immunity to food poisoning, the guy said, but everything changes the skill immunity from diseases. After learning more about the new skill, the boy said thoughtfully, as I get better at this skill, it will protect me more and more from food poisoning, but it's a pleasure to be sick all the time to improve the skill, so it's time to learn another skill. Climbing into the water to get a few more new abilities that would be useful to him in the future, the boy said, "Oh, I don't want to." After being underwater for a long period of time, the guy received a notification that he could not breathe and then thought it hurt, but he had to endure it. Trying with his last strength to stay underwater to learn the skill, Kong Tassin mentally said, I don't know where I heard it from, but drowning is one of the most horrible and painful deaths. Having observed a certain limit, the guy finally lifted his head out of the pond and then was able to breathe in with a full chest, but his suffering was rewarded. He received a notification from the system, you held your breath so long that you almost died, you have acquired a skill that is activated under certain conditions of holding your breath. However, that was not all. After that, he received the following system notification while he was catching his breath. You felt death approaching and you have gained a skill that is activated under certain conditions by the death line. After the test was over, the guy removed the wet hair from his face and said tiredly, I hope it worked. Looking through the breath-holding skill, the guy saw the skill activated under certain conditions, mana consumption unit skill unit. You are able to hold your breath for a long period of time at the moment the duration is doubled, after which he said with this skill you can pump breath holding. It is very useful to me in places where the maze from the air is poisoned. I think that not a lot of people will guess how to get this skill because it requires almost suffocation, but it also comes with the skill line of death, so 1+ and then opening another skill, the guy exclaimed in surprise that, looking at the description of his other ability, which said that the skill is 54%, you are able to sense the approach of death and activates in the most dangerous situations. The guy was surprised to hear that my skill was 54%. 54% are my readings from the future. How is it possible that I inherited this skill from myself before I traveled through time? Maybe it's because this skill affects my mind and not my body. But no, because I have 1% of the skill in calm consciousness and insight. Thinking about what could be the reason for such a high rate of skill, the guy said, I don't understand. Reaching into his vault to take out his weapon, the guy mentally said, in the labyrinth of things that have no explanation, I can't afford to sit and think about everything. Pulling out his sword and moving on, the guy said confidently, I have many skills that have not yet been discovered, and I must not stop. After telling the rest of the players about the breath-holding skill and where to get it, Kong received a response in the general chat. He said, Kongjun Hyuk Aijin Hyung, are you sure it will work? After which the guy nervously exclaimed that he was crazy. In response to his question, he received the answer that you don't know such a prince. Who doesn't take risks, doesn't drink champagne. If the risk was small, you wouldn't have gotten anything. Now is the best moment. To which he replied sadly, but that's not what I'm worried about now. I can't forgive me, hen. In response to his doubts, he received a well, it's not worse for you, only for you. Seeing this, the boy grabbed his head and exclaimed, even if it's not the way you want me to do it. At the same time, Kong Tassin began to hone his sword skills by activating the skill of holding his breath. After following certain steps to improve his skills, the guy said in his head that combinations of conditions and circumstances play a huge role in acquiring skills. If you use a skill in a certain situation, you can discover another skill. While swinging his sword during the breath-holding skill, the guy added in his head to apply the breath-holding in a still state and in combat, which are completely different things. After completing the training, when his air-holding skill was exhausted, the guy began to breathe hard to overcome the oxygen deprivation. However, this was rewarded with a couple of system notifications that said if you have dealt severe blows with the breath-holding skill applied, you have gained a special attack skill with breath-holding. You have mastered more than 10 different skills and congratulations. You have now been awarded the title of skilled player. Having received some nice bonuses after the training, the guy looked at his sword and said in surprise, that's pretty good. After modeling the situation in his head, the guy said in his head, just as I predicted the movements of giant rats, I can apply the same to humans. With the help of a breath-holding attack, I can be completely unpredictable in my attacks when I attack the enemy. Opening the system window to view his skills, the guy said a wonderful skill that helped me in the last passage of the maze to open the statistics. Looking at his own characteristics, the guy thought in surprise. It seems to me that Lee Ti-young said that her agility after the first floor was 13, and now I am 21, which is much more. Leaving the safe zone, which had helped him quite a bit in his progress, the guy confidently said, now I can start building my basic skills. Confidently walking down the corridor to his goal, Kong Tassen thought, basic skills usually cost 10 basic skills and allowed him to overcome the huge difference in characteristics with his opponent. For example, skills such as increasing or multiplying or the last hit that ignores any opponent's defense, as well as zeroing the first hit or stopping time that works in a certain radius around the player. All these skills are the fundamentals that give you an incredibly significant advantage over all other players and beyond. Hearing the sounds of a monster near him, Kong Tassen reached into his inventory for his bat shield while he thought, perhaps that was why the methods for unlocking these skills were specific. For example, the total observation skill could be obtained by pumping the insight skill to 2 or 3 times. However, what if even on the first floor there is an opportunity to discover a basic skill that will be much more difficult to discover on the next floors? After finishing his thoughts, the guy received a system notification that said you can see a giant rat. This monster was standing right in front of him and preparing for battle. Deciding that he needed to make the most of the opportunity he now had, he said in his head, of course I have to get it. At the same moment, a giant rat attacked Khan and sank its fangs into his leg, causing 4 points of damage. Watching his health level 1 in the status window, the guy mentally said very cheerfully, bites into my leg, thinking that I can't answer like that a few more times. When he saw the system notification that said you were on the verge of death, you took 4 points of damage, the guy thought a little more. As soon as the limit was passed and the notification appeared, the guy instantly struck with his shield, driving the rat away from him. As soon as he completed the cycle of health loss, the guy received system notifications that said the skill level of the death line had increased to 3%, and the skill level of the calm consciousness skill had increased to 2%. The next moment he received another notification that his life was in danger. This time a rat tried to bite his wrist. By blocking the enemy's attack and throwing it back from him, the guy received a system notification, you completely repelled the enemy's attack. You received a special block skill. Seeing what he got as a result of Kong Tassen's efforts, he mentally said, it's a good skill that nullifies damage below a certain threshold, but I don't need it. Having received another notification of a threat to his life, the guy repelled the enemy's attack with his shield. Continuing to perform the same action for several times, Kong Tassen mentally said, endurance. This is a special skill that nullifies the hit that was supposed to finish off the player and all subsequent hits for a certain period of time. Recalling the moments when this skill helped him out quite often, the boy said in his head that I was the only one who had this skill. Then, sitting on a mountain of lizards he had defeated, the boy heard from his friends, wow, Hen, and how did you get this skill? And then his friend added, I'm also interested. Without receiving an answer from Kong Tassen, Guillaume Jungyun exclaimed in surprise, why do you have such cheating skills? To which he thoughtfully replied, well, that depends. There are only a few ways to learn new skills in a maze, and the first is to learn them from another person, or in another way to do something that no one else could do before. This is the first way, and finally the second. Continuing to keep the defense against the attacks of the monster, which could not calm down, the guy mentally said, you can reproduce an effect close to a skill. Looking at the enemy, who was on the verge of his rage, the guy mentally said, I held my breath and thus acquired the related skill of practicing strikes using breath holding, and thus acquired the skill of striking while holding my breath. And now we return to the second way of acquiring skills. What do I have to do in order to get the stamina that nullifies the lethal blow? Looking at his enemy who would help him acquire the necessary skill, Kong Tassen smiled slyly and confidently added, it's very simple. I will block attacks that were fatal to me. After blocking another attack of the enemy who continued to push, the guy finally received a system notification that said, "You had blocked several attacks that could have been fatal to you," and then immediately finished the rat. Proudly holding his head up after receiving what he wanted, the guy read the system notification that he received: "You gained a skill that activates under certain circumstances for a long time of endurance." Leaning on his shield and raising his hand up, the guy confidently said that this skill will save lives, so is it really worth giving it up because of fear? After telling his friends about how he got the endurance skill, he responded with the words, "I knew that Tae-san was just sick in the head. How can he be?" And then he thought, this is how people react. Arriving again at the living spring to restore his health, the boy confidently said, "But in the labyrinth nothing can be obtained without risk." Kneeling down and taking water in his hands, he took a few sips, after which all his wounds healed and his pond returned to its perfect state. After recovering, Kang Tae-san sat down on the lawn to rest and thoughtfully said, "I have perfectly mastered the skill of the line of death and the calm consciousness of what else I can learn." Thinking about what else he could do, the guy said, "I have a couple of ideas, but in my past life I had about 200 skills at my disposal," and then he heard a rustle from the bushes. The next moment, seeing an old man in front of him, Kang Tae-san jumped up from his seat and exclaimed, "So there really is someone here." Immediately after these words, a man appeared in front of Kang Tae-san who was desperately seeking God, and he looked quite impressive, quickly reaching into his inventory to get the equipment. The boy heard a great answer from a man who suddenly appeared on the horizon. Covering his body with a shield, the boy mentally told the monsters that the road to this place was forbidden, so he was an NPC. However, as far as I know, most NPS that are at the level of difficulty of hermits are crazy. At the same time a person who was looking for God asked, "You are a traveler?" Hearing the man's question, Kang was surprised to hear that he was a traveler, to which the man added, "We call those who pass the test to pass the maze one of them," to which the man added, "Yes." At the same moment, Tessin recalled a dialogue with Lee Tae-young, who told him that when I was resting at a living spring, an old knight appeared, as if he were a servant of some god. Recalling the passage of the girl's story, the boy's memories were cut short, missing the main point, and he thought in confusion, what happened next? I have to remember as soon as possible. Confused by the fact that he did not remember the girl's further story, the boy lowered his shield, but at the same moment the old man attacked him with his fist. As soon as Kang Tae-sun regained consciousness, he heard then try to deflect this, and then saw a fist that was a moment away from his face, and the system alert Ainsel used a fatal blow. All he could do was watch his inevitable death approach and the system notification that said, "Ainsel is attacking you." At the same moment, a system notification appeared in front of the guy, which said that the death line skill was activated, and as a result he exclaimed, "I'm definitely going to die," but still managed to raise his shield. The next moment, Ainsel struck a direct shot right at the backboard that got in his way, followed by a loud thud. Feeling the powerful onslaught of the person seeking God, Kang Tae-sun gritted his teeth and tried to stay on his feet, saying in his mind what a strong blow it was. Seeing the attack, so that it slipped through his defense, the boy swung his shield, knocking Ainsel's fist to the right side of him, and then received two system notifications: "You have withstood incredible strength, your strength has increased by 1, you have deflected an incredible blow of incredible strength. The skill of conditional activation of repulsion is open." Just as the guy was relaxing a bit from the fact that he had managed to avert the deadly danger, he heard a shout of "How about that?" and noticed that another blow was flying right at his face, and he would definitely not have time to dodge it. Feeling the warmth of the mule's hand millimeters away from his face, Kang Tae-sun said in his head, "I definitely won't have time to dodge what kind of techniques he can use when he has such strength." After completing his combination, Ainsel shifted his center of gravity to his right foot to keep his balance and exclaimed, "Wow! That's just amazing, I never would have thought." Seeing that the damage done was only 35,211 points, he added, "I thought I would knock out 100,000 points of damage, but it turned out to be only 30. At the same time, trying to get up from the rubble of the destroyed wall, the guy noticed that he had a notification that said the effect of the non-lethal blow skill was activated. Trying to collect his thoughts after a short flight, the guy opened one eye and looked at his grandfather and mentally said, "He smashed the wall of the maze with one blow. What is this?" The goalkeeper was also very strong, so in the hermit mode the NPCs are only monsters. As he continued to lie on the rubble of the wall, Ainsel approached his opponent and said, "But besides all that, you surprised me quite a bit, boy." Recalling what exactly happened at the time of the collision, he added that at the very last moment you put a shield in front of you and then let go to reduce the force of the collision. In response to the admiration of a person who seeks God, Kong Tassin said, "I shouldn't stand there like a stuck man in such a situation," and was answered with a joyful voice, "Yes, that's true." The next moment, reaching out to the boy he was testing, Ainsel happily said, "I didn't mean to kill you at all, that's why I used a non-lethal blow. But even without that, I think you would have stood up anyway. I don't think it would have been a problem for you," which is what I heard in response when their hands joined. "Do you think so?" Picking up the guy from the ground and clenching his fist, the man turned his head to the side and said, "You fought for your life like a madman. I was impressed by your skills and you stood out, with such characteristics you were able to deflect my blow." Hearing Kong Tassin's words, I dusted myself off and thought in surprise, I knew that the NPCs in this maze were not bots but individuals. But he knew about the skills of this light young man and did not tell me. At the same time, Ainsel added happily, "Honestly, I thought you were a weakling, but I'm very glad I was wrong. I give you full credit for your name, Traveler," to which the boy replied, "Kong Tassin." Having received more information about the outstanding man, he extended his hand and said joyfully, "What a wonderful meeting. This is a real miracle. I am a seeker of God. My name is Ainsel." At the same time, the boy recalled the story of his friend who, after escaping from the monsters, arrived at a living spring to recover and said sadly how sick of these rats she was. Unsuspectingly, she began to collect living water, saying, "Well, at least it's safe here," not even realizing that a man was approaching her from behind. Before she could even react, she heard a rustle behind her and looked back to see Ainsel's fist in front of her face and managed to shout out who it was. Stopping his blow at the last moment before the collision, the man who was looking for God huffed in surprise and then pointed his finger at the frightened girl and said, "You turn out to be a coward." Recalling a moment in the story of his friend Kong Tassin, Tai Young mentally said that the knight looked at her with a contemptuous look and left, and she never met him again. Immediately after turning his gaze to the man who squeezed his hand and continued to wave it loudly, the boy nervously thought, "What do you mean by that?" Tearing his hand away from Ainsel's grasp, Kong Tassin said, "Can I ask you a question?" To which the latter confidently replied, "Of course," after which the boy's voice sounded, "Why do you suddenly attack people? Do you like to insult the weak?" After receiving the question from Kong, the man scratched his beard thoughtfully and said, "Of course not. I'm a paladin. Why would I offend those weaker than me?" This was just a simple test for the guests of the source, after which the grandfather smiled happily. But Tassin was not amused at all. He only said unhappily that this was a test. Then the man raised his hand up and said confidently, "I check with visitors whether they have the will to fight for their lives in the maze and whether they are worthy of my attention. I am annoyed by people who know nothing about themselves. For example, you are worthy of your attention." After hearing Ainsel's praise, the guy said, "Well, okay, then thank you," and then thought, that explains a lot. He evaluates people by their self-confidence. At least I know he won't be my enemy. After finishing his thoughts, the boy asked me if his name was Ainsel, and I replied that it was the name my father gave me. Then looking at the old man with a careful gaze, Khan asked, "You said you were in search of God, and what kind of God are you looking for?" There are many gods in this labyrinth, as I know, and they all appear in different places, so this is a rather vague answer. All of these maze gods are different, with their own characters and skills that give challenges and reward players who are able to complete them. However, most players didn't care about the gods at all, and that's because they could only be met if the difficulty level was hermetic. Lee Tae-young, who chose this level of difficulty and visited these mythical creatures, told me a lot about how evil and disgusting the gods are, so I know a lot about them. Hearing the boy's story, Ainsel smiled happily and said, "Of course, the more people who know about the goddess, the better." Recalling who he reports to, Ainsel added, "For example, I currently serve the goddess of love. Her name is Levanov. Our group, we all worshipped her. We praised her name quite loudly, from dawn to dusk. She was just a wonderful goddess who connected with those who loved her. There is no goddess better than her. Immediately afterwards, Ainsel added in frustration, except that my world was destroyed, and I am the only one who still knows anything about her and remembers her. When Kong Tassen heard his grandfather's story, he asked in surprise, so you entered the labyrinth to find her? And he replied, yes, but so far I haven't found even a trace of her. Thinking about Ainsel's words, the boy said to Levinov, I know this goddess, and even more so, thanks to Lee Tae-young's stories, I know which floor she is on. There was only one thing. When he began to recall the story, the girl Kong Tassen recalled some unpleasant facts that the girl had told him. In the room where the goddess of love was found, she was bloody and showed no signs of life, which plunged the girl who found her into shock. After discovering such a terrible picture, the girl began to write to everyone in a common chat about what a horror it was, and that she was going to vomit from what she saw. Recalling the girl's words, the boy added in his head that it was so horrible that even Lee Tae-young, who had seen a lot in her life, almost made her inner world outer, and wondered if he should talk about it. After finishing his thoughts, the boy thought to Tassen, I was going to ask you something, if you don't mind, and he answered cautiously. Then Ainsel added, you're in a big hurry to get out of this maze, to which he replied with a firm no, and then Khan thought, my goal is not to get out of the maze as quickly as possible, but to become as strong as possible and collect all the rewards. When he heard that he was in no hurry and could stay with him, the man seeking God joyfully exclaimed, it's great. I'll teach you the skills of the goddess Levinov, and he replied, of course I want to. Confused by such a quick answer, the old man said in surprise, I didn't even have a shadow of a doubt. I expected you to at least think about what the boy answered, and why would I refuse at all? After accepting the offer from his grandfather, the guy looked down and said to me, I have met a personalized NPC of such power that it is hard to imagine. Of course I want to know all the skills he knows. At the end of the reflection Khan asked, by the way, what do you want to teach me? After which he saw Ainsel wave his hand and answer nothing, taking it as an apology. Bowing before Tassen, the man added, for the sudden attack on you, though it was for the sake of testing, I used violence against you, a stranger. I am a paladin, and I must apologize for it. After hearing the man's apology, the boy said unhappily that maybe he should have just not attacked him, but he heard back that it would not work. Slapping his hand on his armor, the man added, I apologize to you only because I consider you worthy. Otherwise, would have just spat in your face and left. After hearing the weighty argument, Khan thought, what a shot. Following his apology, Ainsel said that his words were worthless, and I thought that since you were a traveler, you would definitely want to enrich yourself with new skills. And he agreed, of course. Having given an affirmative answer to the man seeking a god, Tassen thought it better to learn the skills not through fatal blows than to really risk his life, after which he heard, I'm glad I almost shamed the gods with my behavior. Without hesitation, the man confidently added, well, great. We've solved the main issues. Now we can get down to business. Going out to the clearing where there was plenty of space, the man took a fighting stance and shouted, first, try to hit me with your flimsy shield. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave feedback.